Hey, what's up, guys? It's Friday the 14th. And what I want to talk about today is what I keep talking about, right? Rates and inflation all the time. I'm still getting a lot of folks that are like, man, that 4 point whatever rate is really high. And I keep telling them, it's like, compared to what? And of course, they're looking for that 3.6 or 3.5 that was done prior to what we've talked about here was the US Treasury mandate, right, to Fannie and Freddie. So what we're dealing with here, of course, is supply and demand, supply and availability of funds for us to be able to offer. So what I can get back to, and what I've been talking about these last few weeks, is the cost of everything going up, inflation being a massive concern, inflation pushing the cost of things up. So when the cost of things go up, you would think that it would kind of stagnate a little bit and start working its way back down because people are not going to be buying because it's going up. But then you get the fear factor coming in and people start consuming even more, pushing prices higher. That's what we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with a lot of that, and especially when it comes to housing, when it comes to lumber, all these things, they're afraid it's going to get higher. Right. So the other way that they deal with inflation to try and curb inflation is to raise rates. That hasn't been done yet. They parked more capital in. They flooded huge supply. That's why we had the rates drop the way that they did last year. COVID hit, right? Let's go back to March of 2020. COVID came in. COVID caused massive problems in the market. We had a huge drop in the stock market. Well, because the banking industry does not hold on to your money, they don't lock it up in a vault when you deposit it. They put it out in the market to work. They put it out in the stock market. They also had on margin. So banks are used to lending out leverage of like 10 to 1, right? If you put $1 in your bank account, they can lend out $10, right? That's how they're structured. Something like $10. I'm not 100, don't quote me precisely. Aaron Chapman said $10. I believe it's 10 to 1. So look that one up, Google it. I'll probably look at that later because I'm just going off the top of my head right now. I'm not going off any sort of script. So they lend that out, right? Well, if they're used to lending that, then they go into the stock market with that money on margin, and then the market tanks. Now they have a margin call. They got to meet that margin call. How do they meet that margin call? Well, they're not sitting on the capital to meet it because they're leveraged. So what do? They got to sell other assets. Some of the assets they sold were bonds. Some of those bonds were mortgage-backed securities. Mortgage-backed securities dropped significantly. We had that huge drop in the interest rates at that time. Excuse me, the huge drop in the money supply at that time in the mortgage-backed securities. Interest rates spiked almost overnight, went to over 5. They went to 6% almost overnight. In fact, there was a window there I couldn't even lock. Anybody who was buying there that window remembers I would just go into 2-hour locking sprees and then I'd be froze out. I couldn't lock again, right? That was the situation for about a month. Then you've got into where the Fed started dumping billions every day. They started on March 20th of 2020, and all the way to March 30th to put in $1 billion, right? Excuse me, no, they're not a bit, $1 trillion. $1 trillion went in that 10 days. Then they maintained about probably $10 to $12 billion a day, trickled it down to 8 to 6 to $4 billion a day over several months, and maintained this high level of liquid in the mortgage-backed securities to lend out. When you have that massive liquid in there, right, the demand could not keep up with what supply was going in there. Rates dropped into the 3s. Then we get to March of this year. So literally 1 year later, now all of a sudden the Fed said, or the US Treasury says, we don't want Fannie and Freddie doing investor loans. That's giving money to people who are already rich, basically, right? You're buying investment properties, you're buying second homes. Well, you don't need that, right? So you got to go figure out some other way to get it. We're going to back up just owner-occupied people to 93% of the total portfolio. Sure, we'll play a little bit with it at 7% of the total portfolio. And we know their total portfolio was nearly 25% of both of those types. Now we got to drop it way down. So because of all that, this is the problem we're in. We have interest rates coming up because we have to go to aggregators. Now, what am I going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about when we're referencing these costs going up, right? If everything else is going up, it's reasonable to believe that rates will go up, right? So one of the things I was watching Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting for 2021. And some of the stuff that was coming out was talking about the cost of everything. They have one of the largest home builders in the world, right? They're invested in a lot of things. And one of his quotes from steel, just referencing steel lumber, he says, "We were not expecting it. This is one of the smartest sumbitches in the world on economics and investing." And he said, "We were not expecting it." So if he was not expecting it, anybody who's going to give me a little bit of a beating because I didn't know rates were going up and I didn't know what was going to happen here, Guys, this guy's a hell of a lot smarter than Aaron Chapman, right? Look at me, right? This is not the look of an extremely intelligent man. I'm doing the best I can here. There's no way we would have known this. But what do we do know? Okay, we know that inflation is going through the roof. So I've shown this in the past before, shadowstats.com. This is the regular rate of inflation, tracking, well, the CPI, this is what the Fed is reporting on. This is the real rate of inflation. This is adding in those things that the Fed doesn't look at. Look at where we're at today. This is approaching 5% per the Fed. They're saying that they are seeking to maintain 2% down in here. They were down at 0 before, sub-zero back here. Look, we're approaching 5. We're approaching 5. Well, what does that really mean? That means we're approaching 12 in real inflation. How do you curb inflation? One of their tactics is to raise rates. If they raise rates, what's going to happen now? So so a lot of people aren't happy about interest rates went into the 4s. Still, there's only one window in the history of time, at least my history that I know of, that was lower than it is right now. So if one of the taxes they use to curb inflation is to raise rates, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to come back to me later and say, I wished I would have taken advantage of the low 4s now instead of sitting in the 6s or the 7s or whatever is going to happen. I don't know. So this is my warning to you. The same people that call me up and we get to talking about crypto now and again say, man, I wish I would have bought it back when I heard about it. I heard about it when it was $7. If I would have spent $100, it'd been stupid right now. It was in my so-called crypto account, but I didn't, right? But I don't care. I'm not going to sit here and lament it, right? Because I didn't understand enough to lament it. Don't find yourself lamenting this. I'm warning you now. It's going to go up. It has to go up. There is no choice in all this stuff. So if you're waiting for it to go below where it is today, you're going to keep waiting. I think you might want to just rethink where you're at right now, because with inflation doing what it's doing, you're never going to be in a spot where you're going to be paying more if you lock today. Now, it could happen, right? It could happen. But when you think about where we're at, you're locking in for 30 years, inflation's going up, you keep raising rents. Guys, it just makes sense to set your baselines, focus yourself. I'm warning you now, you're going to be lamenting this at some point. Don't think it's going to come back down. It either is a deal that works or a deal that doesn't. If it doesn't, you walk away. If the deal works, you move forward. Doesn't matter what the rate does. So appreciate you guys, care about you. It's why I talk about this. I'll see you on Tuesday.